Hello everyone, welcome back. Tonight I think I'm going to go back to the material design and XAML project, do some work on the brush theming stuff. I'm still planning on doing a 4.8 release at some point, but it's been a long day. I don't really want to fix bugs. I'm going to have fun building out some new stuff, I think, or at least figuring out what the new stuff needs to be. So high level, what's going on? Previous versions of the material design and XAML project, there were some brushes. They had things like material design, paper, and that kind of thing, which doesn't lend itself well to extensibility. It also means that there's a very small number of brushes. And so oftentimes if somebody wants to change just one particular color, there's not an easy way to say, hey, just go change this and it'll only affect all your text boxes. Because oftentimes things get spam or reused in multiple places. All right, one moment, please. And there we go. So looking to expand out the number of brushes. The problem with expanding the number of brushes is there's obviously quite a bit of work that goes into, one, just applying the new brushes across all of the various styles and templates that there are. There's also some migration issues of how do we get people to move from brush A to brush B and going forward. And initially I thought I was going to be able to push it forward and not break people, and then realized, yeah, that's not really going to be possible. There's going to be breaking changes. And I apologize. So the easiest thing I can do is hopefully put forward some easy find and replace patterns for people to be able to apply to their repositories. Say, hey, brush A, you want to replace with brush B. And there'll probably be a few of those where there's a conditional saying, yeah, if you're using the material design divider in a like a toolbar, this is the new brush. But if you're using it in, say, I don't know, a grid splitter, this might be the other brush. So there's going to be a couple of those things where the existing brushes are going to get forked into several brushes. The other thing with a lot of these brush keys is at the end of the day, we don't really want a lot of individual colors, because really when you're doing a theme, for the easy use case, you really only want to set a handful of colors and have them apply everywhere, right? There's kind of different approaches to this depending on how you're using the library. Some people just want to drop it in and say, I don't want to think too hard. Let me set a primary and secondary color and then just get out of my way, right? Do the theming, have it work. Great. Some people are using it in enterprise applications where they're like, no, we've got a designer, we've got our own color palette. Please don't mess with this. We want to set everything individually. It's like, okay. And so trying to walk that fence and making sure that it's useful for both. So I've got some ideas on how I think I want to accomplish this. I had a new theming brush branch. I may abandon it. I may rebase it. It's hard to say. It's a work in progress. I think there's probably going to be bits and pieces I pull out of it and bring it forward, but I don't know if I'm going to completely keep it wholesale. But let's look at code. Okay, so I am playing with my template demo app. So, hang on. This is an opportunity for shameless self-promotion. Also, the brain teaser that was up. If anybody finds it interesting, let me know. I will circle back to the brain teaser at the end. But if anybody is interested, the app that I am starting with is from my own template. You run, let's see, boom. If you click full WPF project, .NET new, Kebu WPF, boom. That's it. So install the template, .NET new. You end up with something that looks like this. Well, sort of. I've added a box. So here's my current thinking of how I think I want to do this. So I kind of want to play around in this small application. That way I can start small, figure out what the end result needs to look like, because I think we're going to do some source generator-y bits to get everything all up and going. I think. Because there's a lot of things there's a lot of use cases I want to make sure work well, but I figure I'm going to do this with one brush in an isolated little demo, make sure I'm happy with the one case, and then we'll expand it out to everything. So that's the game plan. So I've got this little border. It's got a width. It's got a height. It's using this theme brush that I called Other. And actually, there's also one called primary that we can drop in as well. And as all good UI designers will tell you, the default color is always fuchsia. Mostly because it's ugly enough, I know I'm not going to leave it there. I apologize, T-Mobile, people who pick on the weird pink colors. Sure. I'm sure designers can make it work. For me, it's ugly enough that I leave it as a visual to do. I actually told a designer that I work with recently, I'm like, if you see fuchsia in the app, just understand that that was me trying to communicate I still need a design or a theme for this, and I didn't want to make sure that we ship something that was good enough. So I make it ugly enough to make sure people change it. Okay, so here's this. Nothing fancy. It's a dynamic resource because it's a theme brush. And in WPF, you always want to use dynamic resources on anything that could change at runtime. So typically that will be things like your color themes, because if you want to give the user the ability to toggle between dark and light theme and whatnot, the actual color behind this is potentially going to change. And I think we are going to actually demonstrate changing this. So let's look at what I did. So in my app.xaml, I declared a color. And again, this is me just testing the structure that I think I want for the material design project. So I've got a color, and then I create a solid color brush, giving it a key. So I'm just kind of playing with this idea here. Theme, brushes, primary. On the material design and XAML project, there is a... We go here, this thing, this theme brush rename. There is my proposal here for how some of these brushes are going to break down. Everything starts with material design, dot brush. There will obviously be dot color to go along with it, but then primary light foreground, etc. So I'm playing around with this idea. I think this is the naming scheme I want. I think. Obviously, issues open, all feedback and critique welcome. We link these two guys together. And then this little trick here of going through and generating a static resource, effectively giving me a way to alias it. And I think I like this. Specifically, what I think I like is the ability to be able to come in and let's just do this again, right? So I've got two boxes, other, right? And it gives me that ability to have alternate resource keys, but still source them from the same underlying brush. I think I like this. And specifically, what I think I like is it means I can start with a small number of brushes, because we probably are not going to have that many different colors. So the default material design themes, there's your primary color, which has a dark and a light variant. There's your secondary color, which also has a dark and a light variant. There's things like your dark and light backgrounds, kind of like your, I don't want to say whites and blacks because they're off white and off black a little bit. But you've got some of those. You've got some grays thrown in there for like separators and different things like that, or shadows. But overall, the fundamental colors that start your theme, there's not that many. And what I think I want to let people do is be able to have, one, if people want to go crazy and define every brush, have at it, right? I want to give people a template resource dictionary that has all of them defined, and you can change them to your heart's content, right? If you want all of them, go to town. But I think the way I want to structure that is going to be something like this, where we've got the colors have their brushes, and then behind the scenes, there's a whole bunch of aliases. That way, if somebody goes, no, I don't want this thing aliased off of the primary, I want it aliased somewhere else. Great. Swap this thing out, right? So if we do something like solid color brush, X key, and again, I'm just testing out what I think I want. Other, and then this guy goes color blue, right? Because that's another color, right? Now we can do this. And now when I come back here, this guy is now sourced. So without changing my app, just changing the resource dictionaries that are imported above, I end up with this. I think this is what I want. Again, think. So let's take this a step further, because the other thing I want to test is doing some themey changes stuff. So we've already got a button that's called click me. So we're gonna go reroute this button to do something different. And in general, you should not do what I'm about to do in your view models. This is demo level stuff. We're gonna just try it. So yeah, so this button is bound to increment count. So this is where we want to be. So we're going to do, and specifically, this is the line of code that I would recommend you not put in your view models, ever. App.current. If you find yourself doing this, back up slowly. You are probably mixing view and view model code. In most cases, if you see you're using system windows. That is something, okay, sidebar, while I'm thinking about it. One thing that keeps floating around in my head is I've got these ideas of things that I would want an analyzer to flag in my code. However, a lot of them tend to be very specific to a given project or a domain. And the problem is building a somewhat custom-y analyzer for each project seems difficult. And I keep having ideas float in the back of my head of I'd really love it if there was a simple way, emphasis of the, I realize what I'm proposing is not simple in the least, but a way to have a generic analyzer that I could feed a set of rules to, and then have it apply those at each of my projects. That way I didn't have to build up new analyzers. The whole setup and templating bit is kind of a pain. Let's see, I have a couple questions about your MVVM 8.1 video. You said you should disclose the token of messenger, but if I'm not wrong there is no dispose method in a WPF control, then how can you do it? Hang on, sorry. I think that question's supposed to read, you said you should dispose the token of the messenger, but if I'm not wrong, there is no dispose method in a WPF control, therefore how can you do it? So if you don't mind, Darkham, first of all, welcome. Thank you for the question. Let's take a look. So we're going to come back. Kevin, start here. Okay, so we'll come back to that in a minute. So let's start with this. Messenger. Messenger. Right, so there's a couple cases, and wow, Copilot, no, that is not what I intended for you to learn. So and you're asking me to remember like a whole week ago, and my memory's not that good right now. Lack of sleep and not enough caffeine. So there's a couple ways to go about doing this. Because the messenger is one of those interfaces that ends up in a lot of different places. In my apps, it kind of ends up being that communications piece between like maybe some user controls over here, maybe a window over here, some view models over here, and it's just sending messages all over the place. And so how you might go about handling disposing is going to vary depending on what context we're in. So based on your question, I think what you were driving for is you have a messenger inside of a user control. So let's, and again, feel free to correct me if I'm off base here. Yeah, user control 1 sounds like a great name. Okay, so we've got user control here, and let's just put something in it so we can see it. Some user control. Right. So this guy, for whatever reason, is going to like listen on messages for reasons or similar. Boom. And let's save that, and then let's drop in our user control here. Yeah, user control 1, great. Okay, and let's just build the project so that the designer can be happy. Okay, some user control there. Great. Now, so there's a couple things, first of all, to be aware of. One, I'm going to clean up this default because this all bothers me, and that's a lot cleaner to look at. So the thing with user controls, let's see. Second, with observable corrections, if I sort the source of the list box, I suppose since the items, the list box will be updated during the sort, which is JS waste. Is it possible to positive so the list box will be updated only at the end of the sort? Yes, I will come back to that as well. Inside of a user control, getting your iMessenger into it is oftentimes difficult. But let's pretend for a moment that we've gotten our iMessenger. Let's just pretend that we've gotten it in here. So making your user control disposable is typically not what you want. However, inside of view objects, so this will apply to user controls, windows, etc. You do have loaded and unloaded events. And oftentimes, these are sufficient for what you are doing. So specifically, if you are looking to say, hey, I want this user control to register up on messages, right? So messenger, let's see, was it register all or is registered for the token? One of these guys has the token recipient on here. If one of these was looking to actually do that registration, the unloaded one would be your equivalent for unloading it. The other thing that oftentimes I find myself doing, like for example in the main window, right, is here Windows have a nice close event that you can watch for, and that's a very easy way to say, hey, when is the window closed? However, if you've got things where they are creating their own, or where the user control owns the data context, you may end up wanting to do something like iDisposable. Oh, I'm in the wrong method. You may end up wanting to do something like this, or even if data context is iDisposable. Because oftentimes with your views, loaded and unloaded will end up being the inverse of each other. Now, most of the time this won't be a problem, but depending on how you're doing your user controls and your views, this can occasionally be problematic having multiple disposes. So just be aware of that. A properly implemented iDispose method is expected to be tolerant of being called multiple times. If you let Visual Studio implement the iDispose interface, for example, if I just do it here, and I say Visual Studio, write it for me, you'll note implement interface with dispose pattern. So if you let Visual Studio do it, you will note that it is tolerant of making sure that it doesn't invoke multiple times. So it has this flag that say, effectively, am I already disposed? Which gets set to true here. So if dispose ends up being invoked multiple times, you won't actually end up doing the work twice. So that's how a properly implemented dispose method should work. Not all classes may follow that, so just be aware. If it's just your stuff you're cleaning up, implement dispose properly, problem goes away, everyone's happy. Let's see. Okay. So for view models, if you have an iMessenger instance in here, making your view model iDisposable is definitely one way of going through and handling it. The other way is just giving yourself some sort of cleanup method when you know that it's no longer going to happen. So if you're using the weak reference messenger, and I should think through this before I put my foot all the way in my mouth, the messenger itself will not maintain a strong reference to your view model. So typically, the only thing that's going to hold a reference to your view model is going to be the view itself. So in my use case here, I've got a main window, this view model here. The Windows data context is what's holding the reference to my view model. So unless I've done something where like my DI container has registered this as singleton and is holding on to it as well, the only thing that's going to keep this view model instance alive is this view itself. So giving yourself a method where your view calls back into your view model to notify it of, hey, you're all done, time to be cleaned up. iDisposable is a convenient way to go about doing that, but you don't necessarily have to. So I think that answers question 1, but let me know if I've misunderstood something. So question 2 on the observable collection. So let's go here. So you've got something about like this, public observable collection, right? And we're going to just do an observable collection of ints, numbers, right? So you've got something like this or thereabouts. And the idea being that you want to make a bunch of mutations to this collection. Your sample there, it's during a sort. Somewhere where you're going to be adding, removing a bunch of things. So typically, as you make changes to the collection, it raises the iNotify collection change. So if we look at the numbers collection on here, we will note there is an event called collection changed. And this is what typically is going to get raised all over the place. Now, the observable collection itself doesn't give you a clean way of doing this, but public class my observable collection. We can do this, and we can go observable collection of T. There are some nice handy methods that you can override on here as well. So for example, on collection change. And what we can do is we can say public bool, what's a cleaner way of doing this? Let's do this. We'll actually do a full implementation. I was gonna just do a short one, but you know what? Batch changes. Probably, yeah, we'll call it that for now. So I'm gonna actually implement this whole thing because I've done this on a number of projects myself. I can't think of one that's open source at the moment where I can share the code. So I'm just gonna write it here and away we go. So we're gonna do something like private bool hope there was something built in. So about observability, I've implemented my own mechanism. I hope there was something built in. So there's not really something built in, and maybe I'll talk through this before I get too carried away. Effectively, what you end up doing if you want to have that batch behavior for your observable collection is deriving from observable collection and giving yourself some control over this on collection change. Because by default, it's just going to fire repeatedly. The one thing you do have to make sure that you do is when you are done batching, you do need to raise collection changed. So, for example, public void done batching, right? On collection change, new. And then this guy here, you want to end up sending a reset for the enum value, which will end up telling the UI for like a list box or similar, hey, something big has happened to this list box. Forget what you thought you knew, just do it. Because some things will watch that collection change for like moves, and it'll just move the item around, which is really convenient and very efficient. If it knows that, oh, only one item moved around, that's great. Sometimes this is what you want. The reason I suspect something's not built in, aside from they just didn't do it, is depending on use case, it can be convenient to have your collection actually raise those collection changes. Now, it depends on what changes are happening, right? Like I think of one where there's like potentially like a stock clicker or an animatable graph, is I might actually want to see those changes come in and let my control animate rather than it throwing away all the data and effectively repainting itself every time. So, but in terms of the observable collection, there's, I think deriving from observable collection is probably the cleanest approach. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The token from observable. So that was messenger create observable. That's right. Because this guy comes through and that's right. It was the stuff. Did I leave Fluent? I can't remember if I left Fluent installed on this or not. Because this is the iObserver pattern. Did not leave it here. But regardless of which way it goes about doing it, at the end of the day, if you register and do the observer pattern for the subscription of your messages, you end up with something like object token gets ... right? For now, we'll just do that until it's shut up. And the way I would end up cleaning it up is, and again, this is going to be really dependent upon where in the app it is. But in general, the way I typically go about doing it is having the view typically on the unloaded event, call into my view model via going through the data context, either typecasting to iDisposable, or it's actually perfectly valid. This is in a user control. So in the MVVM space, it is okay for your view to know about your view model. It kind of has to. Oh, thank you for the compliment. I appreciate it. So hard casting your data context to a particular view model type is perfectly valid. In fact, in your XAML, I would highly recommend, and I think I do it here, that your XAML should be directly setting your design time data context so that the tooling can give you hints about, hey, you've messed up this binding, or hey, these, when you type in binding, actually show me the properties on the view model. So it is very okay for your view code to know about its view model. The one thing I would be very cautious of, and this is part of why I typically go through the iDisposable interface for doing the unregister. So for example, I could come into my main window, right? And I could do something like, close is probably where I would do it in a window. Unloaded in a user control, closed in a window. But we could do something like main window view model. Data context. And then I see people do this a lot. They do something like this, and they write a method that looks like this. And in general, the pattern I don't have an issue with. Naming is hard. Like there's a running joke in computer science that there's only two really hard things that we really struggle with. Let's see, what is it? Cache invalidation, naming things, and off by one errors. Those are the two things that are very difficult. And specifically around the naming things, the reason I like to go through the iDisposable interface is it hides away from the view model the exact cases under which it should consider itself disposed, right? It leaves that up to the view, which typically the view will have knowledge about the application lifetime, right? If I'm a window and I'm being closed, I know something about my lifetime. I'm being closed, I'm shutting down. I should tell my view model, hey, clean up anything that you had, we're all done, right? So the view then communicates that information back down. If I'm a user control and I'm being unloaded, effectively being taken out of the visual tree, I should tell my view model, hey, we're all done. I'm not actually, like, you could tell me to do something, but I'm not, I've been unloaded. I'm not really going to contribute anything. You could probably unregister. The one thing I would do, though, is make sure that this method is not a leaky abstraction with its name, right? So the fact that this thing has the word window in it makes me twitch. The fact that this thing has the word closed in it, which indicates something about view state, makes me twitch. Now, admittedly, The class itself is called main window view model. So there's a little bit of that going on there already. But making sure that the name is more reflective about what should be done or about its state rather than about who's calling it. I realize that's a very subtle thing, and I would have no problem with if this was called, cleanup, right? Totally fine with that. Let's see. If unloaded is called when you remove from the visitor tree, what happens when you remove a control from a grid and put it in another grid, for example? That is a wonderful question. So I'm doing this for memory, but we'll go test it. But I'm going to say my prediction first so I can claim I was right if I am right. I believe what we will see is the loaded event will fire when it's added to grid 1. The unloaded event will fire when it is removed from that grid. And the loaded event will fire again when it is added to grid 2. But let's actually confirm that, because there's no reason not to. And then we're going to go here and say, actually, let's do this. I'm going to do 2 grids in here. Grid X name, grid 1. Grid X name, grid 2. And then we're going to go with button, content, move me, X name, button. Let's see, is there a risk to dispose the view model when in reality should be remained active? Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is why I would put, so if you are just moving a control from point A to point B, and the most common case where that happens is when you have like a list box that's virtualizing, because by default, if you bind a collection to a list box, it doesn't generate list box items for every item in your observable collection, right? You might have 10,000 items in your observable collection, but if your list box can only see 8, it doesn't need 10,000 list box items. That would slow your view down immensely. So by default, virtualization is turned on for 5, 6 of the default controls. Don't quiz me on them. And so it'll only generate items for each of the individual ones. I don't think you get, don't worry about it. I do not mind bad typing. I don't think you actually get unloaded events on the list box items or the list box template items when they move. I could be wrong there. I could be wrong. And this is why I like to let the view objects drive the view models, because context matters, right? We can move this button from grid 1 to grid 2 and look at the events that fire. But in a lot of cases, it's fairly rare that you move a user control from point A to point B. Oftentimes when a control gets unloaded, you don't take that same control instance and put it back in the view somewhere else. Oftentimes what's happening is when the control disappears, it appears again. Oh, thank you, Justin Bieber. Yeah, so with the list box item and the scrolling, thank you. I appreciate that. But most of the time when the views are unloaded, it's because like a view has gone away and doesn't need to come back. So if you are leveraging the unloaded, I would tell you to also pay attention to loaded as well, right? But again, context matters. I would potentially do something different for this user control if I was inside of or if this user control was intended to be used inside of a list box versus if this is just a control that I'm slapping up on a details pane somewhere, right? Because oftentimes when controls get unloaded, they're often going away. It's not necessarily that same instance that's going to come back in, at least not typically in code. Because oftentimes the reason controls are getting instantiated is either because you wrote something in your XAML, like, text block button, that caused the control to get instantiated, or it's part of a data template. And so outside of that virtualization case, I don't know if I would care too much about it. I'm trying to think of cases that I've run into where I've needed to have a dispose on something that was inside of a collection, or some sort of notification from items inside of a collection. Typically, I haven't had them inside of the view. Okay, so the one use case I can think of, I had a large collection of objects. They were in an observable collection, and they were being bound to a list view. And there was a view event. I'm trying to remember what it was. There was an event being fired from one of the view objects that I wanted to send a message out on with the iMessenger. What I ended up doing is I had the view just blindly call into my view model that was backing it, and letting the view model use the messenger to send the message. What that subtly did was then move the responsibility of cleaning up any of the registration stuff from the view into the view model. Because the view model was being maintained in my observable collection, and I didn't then care how many instances of the view there were, right? The view may have effectively just called the method on my view model to say, hey, do the thing. But I pushed the responsibility down into the view model, which then also let me test it. But it then took some of that headache away about trying to think about, well, is this control being unloaded because it's going away or dead? And so moving that responsibility out of the view code into the view model can certainly help. And again, the one thing I want to make sure people understand is that it is okay to use the code behind. Some people will hate me for saying that. They're like, code behind bad, bindings, view models. Yeah, code behind is very acceptable if you're doing something that's related to your view. Like the code behind is there. It is the code behind your view. If you're doing view stuff, have at it. Knock yourself out. It's great. And especially if it's, hey, I need to, my view object has some events and I want to push them down. I've been doing a lot of work with Esri's map control recently. And there's cases where some of the stuff that they have is surfaced via events and not via something that's easily bindable. Okay, great. What we ended up doing is writing some code in our code behind to smooth that over, right? The Esri map control may do some asynchronous stuff and notify us of some events, and then, okay, fine, I'll watch for those events in my code behind, but rather than doing much work there, as soon as I can get it out of anything that needs to talk to view objects, I push the code down into my view model, because one, I can then test it, and then two, it takes away that responsibility. Sorry, I missed this question. So let's see. For example, I move controls from one grid to another when I make floatable tab items where tab item becomes a float window. Ah, yes. Okay, so if you've got the browser experience or even the Visual Studio experience, right, where you drag the tags, you pull them out, because this is now, even though from a user perspective, all I've done is pull a tab out, from a developer perspective, we understand that, okay, hang on. What you've actually done is created a new window. You've now taken that thing that was populating the tab before, and you've made a new one. So in those cases, yes, you would almost assuredly see both the, I guess it depends a little bit on how you did it, but you would probably see unloaded and loaded triggering in both of those cases. I think for those, I would probably still suggest pushing it into the view model, letting the view communicate to the view model if there are relevant application lifecycle changes that it needs to know about, and then letting the view model drive at that point. I think that would, as a general practice, and again, context matters, and there, I can already think of exception cases where I've done otherwise, but they've all been specific to what was needing to happen in that application at that point. Yeah. Great questions. I love the discussion and love questions. So thank you for dropping those in. Let me know if I missed anything or didn't cover it. I'm scanning back through them now. I think I talked about all of them. I'm not sure if I answered all of them. Yeah, you could certainly use a flag to do it if you know that you're in the moving around state. As much as possible, I think I would suggest trying to avoid needing flags. But again, there's so many cases. Like people often worry about event handlers. So for example, I registered up this close event handler. And event handlers are notorious for causing memory leaks. Notorious. And I think I've talked about this before. It's because these two characters, it's really easy, especially in WPF, to accidentally link two things together that you did not intend to link together. Because under the hood, what you're actually doing is creating a new, what is this? Event handler object. This looks like method name so this actually looks like this. So you're actually instantiating an object, and there is, just to be clear, we'll put the this in there to make it really obvious. And this is one of those areas where things always get really messy, especially if you start using events to communicate between your views and your view models. Which is why with the iMessenger, I like using the weak reference one, because it dodges this whole problem. Because what ends up happening, and in this case, there's no memory leak. There's no memory leak because this event is on the same instance as the event handler. They're going to die at this. It's the same object. It's all going to die as one group, right? The problem comes is when they aren't the same object, and now you have to start thinking about, oh, did I unregister that event properly? Because unregistering an event is kind of the same problem as needing to know, when do I get rid of my messenger token, or when do I call dispose, right? If I register for an event, I have to think about, okay, those two things are coupled together now with a strong reference. When do I unregister for the event? Or do I even need to, right? If it's if the objects are expected to have the same lifetime, like you register for an event, like for example, on the main window, if I do, give me a named object. Okay. Stack panel. Right. If I do this and go stack panel dot loaded, right, and register for this, I'm also not worried about memory leaks because these two things are expected to die together. Mr. Kevin, you're such a cool WPF Dungeon Master. Thank you, Justin Bieber. Because when the window dies, the stack panel is going to die with it. Now, admittedly, I can get away with that because I know that I'm not moving the stack panel around in my visual tree, right? Like the examples we were going through earlier where, well, maybe this thing is moving around. Maybe it's being swapped out for on different tabs. Maybe it's being pulled out. Context matters. But in this case, it's like I'm not worried about any memory leaks because at the point the main window goes out of scope, the stack panel will be out of scope as well. They'll die as a unit. Perfect. That's what we want. Yeah. And if you've got specific use cases that you want to talk through, ideally if it's open source and you can share it, great. If not, if you want to just talk through it, I'm also happy to look at those. It's one of those, it's really easy to throw out recommendations when it's general. But like I said earlier, with a lot of this WPF stuff, context really matters. And when the rubber meets the road and you're actually building an application, you will probably find use cases where things get weird and difficult. Or you pull in some third-party library, and it's like, well, shoot, I can't do the normal thing because, you know, this property here that I wanted to bind to is not bindable. Okay, now I have to do extra stuff in order to make it work, right? Maybe I do a behavior or an attached property or something to make these things work. And then the question goes, well, should it have been bindable? maybe there's a good reason why the authors didn't do it that way, and then round and round we go. And sometimes it's like, well, maybe it's that way because it doesn't work in the general case, but maybe in your use case, it's fine. Like I find that a lot with the Esri controls that I've been working with. They're very well designed. It's just sometimes once I confine them to my one specific use case, it's like, dang it, it'd be really nice if, insert thing here. But it's like, okay, I get why it's not done that way. It doesn't work in the general use case. Because I'm defined my scope this big, I can get away with it. But in general, it doesn't work. So also, Dot Morton, if you're watching, love the work. It is awesome controls to work with. I left myself a note a while ago. There was a button. Have you used ChatGPT? What are your thoughts? What use cases have you found useful? Yes, I have used it. I would say ChatGPT is to search engines what Copilot is to C#. It is. So the couple use cases that I found useful for it. One, generalized like programming questions of how do I do X? Sometimes its results vastly exceed what you would get with Google because it's synthesizing data down. The problem being is ChatGPT, unfortunately, was trained from, humans that are apparently dumb. Insert Stack Overflow articles here. And so sometimes ChatGPT gives you really convincing looking answers that are 100% wrong. I was asking it some PowerShell questions last week, and I was really impressed with the answers it gave. I was like, that's really impressive. And so I shared it with some colleagues, and one of them looked at it and went, yeah, it gave you 2 suggestions, but one of those suggestions is just straight up wrong. I'm like, yes, but the first one is kind of close to what I actually wanted. So I was like, in that regard, it is, huh? Robert, I don't know what you did. Sorry. Shield mode on. Turn. Oh. Robert, I don't know what you clicked, so I'm clicking the button because it's big and purple and in my way. Also, welcome, Robert. So I have found it really useful for asking like how-to type questions on programming stuff. So it's really great there. The other place that I've actually used it, and it's funny that you used the Dungeon Master reference a minute ago, Justin Bieber, because I do run I DM for a group. We've been going just over a year, and so one, I only played I think two or three games of D&D before I was like, yeah, DMing looks like fun. Let's do that. Don't recommend that for most people. Didn't know what I was getting into, and then more importantly, decided to jump off the deep end because my wife was helping, and she loves story-driven stuff. She's great at that. She doesn't care as much about like the mechanics and strategy bits, but loves the story aspect of it. And so it's like, yeah, we'll put our heads together. We'll do our own world creation, build out our own campaign. Did not realize how much work that was. It's a ton of work. Fair warning, don't do that. Or at least understand what you're getting yourself into. But ChatGPT is actually not bad for like rules questions. It's also not bad for world generation questions, because you can just do something like say, hey, gen me up, some NPCs for a tavern, and it just barfs out a bunch of stuff. It kind of gets a little repetitive at times. You sometimes have to mix up the keywords or regen responses, because it does feel like occasionally I'll get to the end where a lot of the responses start to feel real similar. But because it's contextual, you can go, yeah, okay, try that again, but this time don't use necrotic damage. And it's like, oh, thank you. And oftentimes, I'll take what it spits out and I'll change it and clean it up. But for things like writer's block, it feels like it could be really helpful in that regard. So yeah. So I think it is awesome. I would definitely advocate people give it a shot. It's fun to play with, if nothing else. Straight up fun to play with. There was, let me look real quick because I don't know if it's live yet. A colleague of mine actually wrote a nice blog post on it, but I don't know if it's published yet. So before I say anything about it, let me doesn't look like it's published yet. I don't see it. I should kick him and see where it is. But he had a very nice write-up on it. I don't know why it's not published. I'll look. I will look. Okay, something, theme brush changes. Something. Okay, so backing up to where I once was. Here. So I think what I would like to do is set this little app up. Because again, I've got two little boxes with a little bit of color in them. And I want to look at a couple use cases of, I want to refactor the resource dictionaries to be in the same structure that they would be inside of the material design library. And then look at how easy are they to just immediately consume. How easy are they to change from either XAML or code behind? And then how easy are they for people who want to change just a few versus change them all? Which means I might have to add a second brush so I can do the few case. But I think that's what I'd like to test. So maybe we start there. Let's start with a couple resource dictionaries. So add resource dictionary. So if we were to structure this in, let's see, we'll call it theme colors. Right, so we're going to do something like that. And then I think what I'm going to do is add resource dictionary, theme brushes. Another question, this is more generic. I don't want to abuse your kindness, but I can answer from you. If I have a validation code, let's see. If I have a validation code class full of constant strings, email not verified, etc., that I want to use as a base class for multiple projects, and I want to add another validation codes only relevant for those projects, how do I avoid and create a class that extends a base class so the both and the core can continue using? That is a good question. Let me think for just a moment before I answer. So I can't resist writing code, so I'm gonna just mock something out a little bit, right? So public class validation codes, right? Public string email not verified, its name of email not verified, exact value doesn't matter, right? Thank you, Copilot. Sure, we can have a second one just because you asked. Now, so there's a couple things that are worth considering. Yeah, so partial, and here's the thing. So there's a couple things. So one, if you have a class like this that contains either only constant, or sometimes I found that they can't be compile time constant, but you can do like static read only, right? Maybe you've got some GUIDs or something that you want in there that are functionally constant, but not known at compile time. Yeah, Robert's right. Making the class static. The thing that I'm hearing in the question though is in some of your projects you want to have something like public class validation codes in project, right? So this is maybe we'll call this base, right? Right? And this is immediately where the problems start, because then you run into the case of once the class is static, this doesn't really work anymore. So there's a couple things I would propose considering. So, yeah, static read only because const. Yeah, there's subtle differences. Const is only the compile time constant stuff, and there's plenty of cases I've run into where I need static read only instead. So there's a couple things that you could consider. One would be file linking. So and this is gonna this technique depends on where the project is. So let's imagine I have this thing here. What you can do is you can go add existing item. That's the wrong project. Let's try that again. Where the heck is this thing actually located? Open containing folder. I'm here. I forgot where I was. So let's try this again. Add existing item and quit being there. I don't want to be in test tools. So what you can do, so I'm adding an item to my test project, and this is purely arbitrary, but you can go add and add as link. Now, this is one of those cases where adding file links is convenient because now I have one file that's being used in two places, right? If I edit one, right, and we say, okay, Copilot, gen me another one, thanks. It doesn't matter which one I open, it's the same file. The thing to be aware of is file linking is functionally the same as just copying and pasting that class into both projects. There's nothing more magical about it than that. And so file linking can then start to cause weird problems because you could imagine because I've got project A, project B, imagine project C that references both project A and B, and I call validation codes dot, and it immediately goes, hang on, which one do you mean? Because since it's the same file, it's going to be the same namespace, it's going to be the same class name, and so then you run into that kind of problem. But file linking, I save to Git or not. So yes, saved in Git, but it doesn't show up in the project directory. What it'll show up as is in your CS proj like this. So you'll see this type of line get added in. So then if you're looking at like a PR or similar for a diff, you'll only see it in one place. So if you're using file linking, I oftentimes, I get very cautious about what I'm file linking if the file contains public stuff. Because as soon as you get it, because you can get into that case where project C comes in, references project A and B, and now it's you have to deal with like extern alias to disambiguate which one of those two classes you mean, because each of those assemblies has their own copy of the class. So assuming you own all the assemblies in question and they're in the same repo, file linking is an option. Another option, and it's kind of wasteful, is you can end up pushing things into like a shared project between them. That is kind of overkill. It also doesn't play nice if you want it doesn't play nice if you want to extend it. So the advantage of, or I should say, I'll point this out. The other advantage of file linking is I can now get away with this garbage with partial. So you'll note I've added a partial here. And if I do this, let's get rid of this one. Right? So if I come in here, collapse, give me a new thing. Pudding. Oh, not the pudding I wanted. I wanted that one. Right? So I can now get away with this. And then if I reference it, let's see, validation codes base, you'll note, hey, why doesn't it show them all? Passwords do not match. Passwords do not match. Oh, because this is in the wrong namespace. Move you out. So you'll note I've got two files here, and as long as I put them in the same namespace like they're supposed to be, because right now that partial isn't doing anything. Okay, now we go back. And now if I do the IntelliSense, I see all three. So if you do the file linking, file linking does give you a nice opportunity, we'll say, to abuse partial. Because again, file linking is no different than if you were to just copy that file into both places and then you're good to go. The advantage of file linking is you don't have two copies of the file, so you aren't trying to keep two things in sync, which would be horrible. It's just the tooling copies the file for you and saves you the effort. But it is effectively just that, copying the file for you. It also does mean that if you do file linking, you have to kind of think about your namespaces, because normally your namespace follows the project that it's in. But as soon as you do file linking, you have to violate that, because now you've got a class that has to be in a different namespace in order for that to work. So, but again, use cases will vary, but file linking is an option. Some sort of shared project would be another. So just straight up push the code down into a lower level one. Let's see. If I use file linking in any case, it means I cannot have the validation code base in a DLL that I can use in different projects, but I must have the code ported from one project to another. Correct. File linking is really only viable if you end up effectively if all of the projects are in the same solution, or at least in the same repository. The moment they get outside the same repository, file linking really isn't a viable choice. Some people I've seen file link across repositories and just tell people, hey, when you clone this, you also have to clone this other repository side by side. Don't do that. That's yucky. It's somewhat okay if we're talking about submodules, but it gets yucky. I don't like it. Yeah, a common shared project. The other thing you could do, and I guess it depends on how much infrastructure you want to put in place around this. Because if it is just a class with some constants, there's trade-offs on the time to do it. So there are a few other features that could be viable options. For example, there are what are called source-only NuGet packages. So rather than a NuGet package coming in and referencing a DLL, a NuGet package can bring in source code files. It gives you file linking like behavior, except for rather than the source of it being another file that's in your repository, it's a file that's shipped down via a NuGet package. That would be one option. The other thing could be a question on what is the source of truth for these constants as well, because I do think about, and again, this is probably way overkill. Not probably. This is definitely way overkill. But even like source generating them in to make it work could potentially be an option. But again, that's almost assuredly overkill. The other thing that I've kind of abused in the past, if you don't mind breaking namespace problems, the only real advantage to having them all in the same class is so that you can go dot on the class and see them all in your IntelliSense. Sometimes just futzing with class names can be reasonable. So validation codes. I've cheated a little bit just knowing that IntelliSense likes alphabetizing. Validation, launch codes, because that's useful. Thanks, Copilot. You're on fire. And just cheating this. That way, and again, assume that these are coming in from different places. But other than that, I don't know if there's... let's say I have many websites. Every website has validation codes for email and passwords. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that use case makes sense. The difficulty being that I think what I would do in that use case is I would probably propose that validation codes might be too generic of a container name, and instead do, web validation codes, and then in each the projects that need to extend it, right? So this ends up in my NuGet package or shared DLL or wherever I put it. But then the one that's actually in the dog breeds, right? Or the stock one, stock validation codes. The other thing you can do is you could abuse namespaces a little bit, right? So then as long as I put so even though the classes are coming from different assemblies, as long as I put all of the classes in the same namespace, I'm still then able to, in my project, do something like validation dot, and then rather than seeing member names off of the class, if I know that all of my validation classes, regardless of whether they came in from a NuGet package or similar, you can cheat and just do the same thing, just shift it up a level, right? So rather than typing class name dot to get the IntelliSense to see them all, namespace dot gets you the class name, and then organize them accordingly by name, right? And then you can drop into where things need to go. And then you're off to the races. What are you squawking about? Yeah, because that's one thing. Like oftentimes people expect like the general guidance is your namespace should follow your project name, right? That's by default that should be where you start, or I should say project name and then hierarchy, right? So if you've got folders, blah blah blah. But there's nothing stopping you from putting things in different namespaces. And so at least by convention, you can go that route. So if the goal is just to get the IntelliSense to be easy, having a reasonable namespace name, that could be fun. And I know I've abused that a little bit as well. It's actually the same way that a lot of the generic host stuff works. So when you see all of the things that are on like configuring the services where you do services dot, all that is people writing extension methods and putting them all in the same namespace so that when you do services dot, you see a list of namespace. That's how they get the behavior of, hey, I install a NuGet, and now when I do services dot, I have, add end service bus, right? Great. The only reason that works is because end service bus created an extension method that's inside the common namespace that they assume everybody's already referencing, so it just magically shows up. I often find not to use hierarchy of namespaces because there's too much typing and lines of code become too long. That is true, and I think namespaces go right in hand with the idea of naming things as hard. Like, I had a colleague I think it was yesterday, lament that some new stuff we were building, the namespaces were already problematic, which points to him. He was right. And then we got to have a good discussion about what we should change to fix it, because I will confess I was part of the problem. So that's on me. The other thing with namespace to be aware of, horizontal scrolling, is you don't always have, you can think of namespaces the same way you do like relative file paths. And so you'll note back here when I type this out, all I typed is validation. And because of the base namespace lining up of template demo, this is all I need to disambiguate. So if you think of namespaces as relative paths, sometimes that kind of helps me conceptualize what's going where, and what I actually need to do. Yeah. I think that's why people have gotten like those massive, 60-inch wide monitors, is because they hate horizontal scrolling as well. I'm pretty sure that's the reason for massively large monitors. I could be wrong. Hey, look, there's the brain teaser from today. We'll circle back to that later. But yes, for anybody who missed it, here's the brain teaser. It's a very simple one. The values of A, B, and C. And then the follow-up question is always, why? Because I'm guessing most people in the chat can easily type this code and run it and see the values, but then understanding why the values are that way. So, and so far, the last 3 brain teasers I've done have been courtesy of me just doing code reviews and finding them. Because sometimes I look down at things and go, hang on, something doesn't line up with my internal compiler. And it's because my mental compiler doesn't work, or it doesn't work appropriately. Okay, so I'm going to move this. And I realize I named these resource dictionaries dumbly, because I called this colors, and I'm going to put a brush in it. Let's see. I think A equals now, B equals min value, C equals max value. Interesting. I lost my place. Wish there was a way for me to... Ooh, I know. I can... Hang on. I got this. Let's see. Add existing. Whoop. Put it right above my head for now. There. We'll leave it there for anybody who wants to poke their head at it. Yeah. So get date time is a local function inside. It is a fun one because there's 2 separate concepts at play. Though I did realize when I was showing this to several colleagues that not everybody... Some people... it's weird to me that certain aspects of the C# language, some people just go, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. And other ones just miss. And I'm trying to not say which concepts to avoid spoiling things, but the ones that I find that people just intrinsically think, oh yeah, of course it works that way, those are the best features. That means you hit the mark on the head, C# team. Okay, and we didn't move the brush in. So I want to do this. Actually, I want both of these lines. Collapse that up, and then we're going to do brushes. We're going to do this. So I think what I want to do, and I don't really want this one. I want this line instead. Just realized I don't have Karnak running. Clean that up. So we've got that, and now both brushes, because the designer should just be working. Oh, it's not going to work because I didn't reference either of those resource dictionaries. Now, my assumption being that I can very easily resource dictionary, source, and I think I should be able to get away with going theme, let's see, theme brushes, example. Oh, I'm sorry, Copilot. You were right, and I didn't listen to you. I apologize. Please forgive me. You are great and always right, Copilot. Okay, now if we build, I think that works. Oh, it doesn't work yet. Index was less than the size of the collection. That's an interesting error. That's not the error I would expect. That's a very interesting error. And the only reason I say it's not the error I expect is because I would have expected it to say like unknown key, because I'm straight up referencing a key that it doesn't know anything about. So I would expect it to do that. But okay, and then you have to reference the theme colors dot XAML. I think that's what we want there. Now you should not fail. Unknown build error. Index was outside of range. What the heck have I done? So let's do this. I do that. Are you happy now? Oh, interesting. So I can't separate. So if I do this, see, this is why I wanted to test this, because I wasn't sure if I could get away with something like this. So this static resource trick is not hip if I do this. Oh, thank you for the subscription. Appreciate it, Darko. But it's okay if I put it there because it finds it. Interesting. So you definitely deserved it. Well, thank you. I try. I definitely, by all means, I love questions. I come on here to stream and I usually have an idea in my head about what I want to work on. And mostly that's the filler work, unless people have questions or I get distracted on stuff, because I definitely don't mind. I definitely don't mind going into questions for things. Though, small self-promotion. If people want to follow on YouTube, I am hoping to start putting together some shorter videos, specifically with just these brain teasers in them. I was figuring those could be simple little 5-minute ones that are easy, where people can drop in, see the problem, I'll explain it. You can pause and try to think through it before I give you the answer and walk through it, because I personally absolutely love these types of little coding brain teasers. I love when I see them come up on like Twitter and whatnot from different people. They are amazing. But I also fully acknowledge that I am weird and I should not consider myself the standard use case. Okay, so that is perfectly interesting. So it's okay if I do that. It's okay if I do that. Is it okay if I do... It's also okay if I do that. It's just not okay if I end up specifying it. Okay, so if that's the case, can I get away with... So this is other. The 1970, 1970, 1901. Let's see. Now I have to go back and relook at my own problem and remember. So let's see. So null is the first parameter. So no, there. But I can tell you, I can tell you right away, 1901 is incorrect. You shouldn't get a 1901 for the year on any of them. All of them are default. And this is why these problems are great, because it has been distilled down into just a handful. Like, whenever I do the brain teasers, typically I find these things in code reviews, and it's usually amongst this big function and lots of stuff going on and yada 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 yada. And I try to see how tightly I can distill it down, because there's something elegant when you can get the problem down to just 1 or 2 lines, to specifically show off what the problem is. So, hang on. If I do this, that renders red. And if I just straight up comment this out, it falls back. Oh, interesting. Great brain teasers every stream. Thanks. No problem. It was actually a colleague of mine when I was posting out brain teasers, because I've got just a running Teams chat with a group of different people that I've worked on different projects, and the chat is mostly around sharing memes and GIFs, but I will throw brain teasers in every so often. And his comment was, he's like, you should post those up on your stream. I think people would love them. I'm like, sure, we'll give it a try. And so far, people seem to enjoy them. Interesting. Okay, so if I just do this and generate out the resource dictionaries this way, what I really should end up doing, if I just generate one big resource dictionary that has color, brush, aliases, then all anyone has to do to change one of these things out is change out the alias. Now, what happens if rather than doing other, I do primary here? I think I know what happens. Right, so that's swapping to primary. But I'm curious how that ends up doing the resolution. That's interesting. Yeah, no, I love the discussion. I like seeing how people think and approach the problems too. Like I said, every time I see one, I always take the brain teasers, and I always try to go through and like either verbally speak out loud what I think the answer is or write it down, because otherwise, if I just kind of think it in my head, I get into that state where I lie to myself. It's like, oh yeah, I totally got that one. It's like, did you? Are you being honest with yourself? And only about half the time am I being honest with myself. I think I like this. I think I like this. So I think what I want to do. Okay, so for the material design library, I think this is what I want. I want to generate a resource dictionary with theme colors. Right? Under the hood, I then want what I will call primary brushes. Basically, one-to-one with colors. And then what I then want to do, brush aliases with all of the individualized aliases for the brushes on the individual controls. So going back to where I started, if I can, this guy here, if anybody's interested. So all of these here, but at the end of the day, I want to go through each control and generate out the brushes that they need for it. Now, if I get really fancy, I generate the list of brushes. That's if I get really fancy. Because it would be really cool if I didn't have to know about all of them. Though, I guess if I do that, I break the Visual Studio tooling, and that's probably worse. That would be bad. That would be bad. I wonder, can I do... Okay, now I want to test some things. I wonder, can I get away with... you'll do. Public class my dynamic resource. Dynamic resource. So, can I do this? Can I? I think I can get away with this. I think I can get away with this. Because I don't need it to do anything special. I'm just so here's my crazy idea. So imagine these brushes. Like these brushes are just sitting in main window.xaml in an app. But imagine instead that these brushes are... Why is... My machine has been giving me nothing but problems. And I don't understand. It's like Windows Explorer has decided it hates me. But imagine these brushes instead are inside of, I don't know, chip, right? So, where is a dynamic resource in here? Come on. Tell me one. Dynamic, these ones. So imagine instead that they were here. Because my thought is it would be pretty cool. I guess I could still hunt out the list of brushes just by ripping through all of the styles, looking for anything that was a dynamic resource that started with material design dot for the key. And then I could automatically pick it up. Because that would be pretty slick. Not gonna lie, that would be slick. Because it would be pretty cool if just by adding it to the template, we could generate that out. So the reason I like that idea, or why I want to know about all of these brushes, is right now we have this iTheme class. Because one thing that I have noticed is that some people like editing their stuff in XAML, and some people like doing it in C#. And especially when it comes to doing logic-y things, like, hey, the user changed their theme, I would like to change just part of it, right? Some people want to write a XAML file, and apparently I can't do that. Some people want to write a XAML file like this that just overrides a brush. And some people prefer to say, no, just give me the theme object. I'm going to go through and set the colors I care about, and away we go. Right? And this lovely little guy here, there's also some extension methods so that you can just say like set primary, set whatever, and it populates all the things. So I want to, like, I don't want to break that conceptually because that's nice. But I kind of like the idea of having something that'll just rip through all of these styles and appropriately generate that. Because if I have to build resource dictionaries that look like this, now admittedly, I've done this in 3 lines, but this is likely going to be something like 300 lines when we're done. Because the number of colors won't be big. It'll be in the, like, I think 8 to 10 range. Right? Because I've got 3 primary, 3 secondary, which is 6, and then probably maybe up to maybe about a dozen. I think there's probably, because there's going to be like validation color, there's going to be the shadow and the separator. There's going to be like, I think in any given theme, 10 to 12 maybe colors. Then the primary brushes are going to mirror those, so 10 to 12 there. And then the aliases are going to be a gazillion. Because in an ideal world, I want to be able to have individual brushes for each template so that if somebody says, hey, I want to edit my text box templates, they can do that. Ooh, that's what I wanted to check. Can I chain these things together? Right? So if I make you other, and I make you other 2, right? What happens here? Do you still work or do you not work? Like, I can see already the daisy chaining breaks it, but I should make these things smaller. I don't need them to be, actually. Let's do that. Boom. So I can daisy chain them together. That's convenient. The only thing that's mildly inconvenient about it is if you replace the one in the middle, it doesn't propagate down. So for example, other 2 depends on other, which depends, so yeah, other 2 depends on other depends on primary depends on color, right? So we've got 4 layers in here. The issue being, I don't think I can do, I don't think I can get away with that, can I? I don't think I can. Let's see. How about we call this theme override? Because I think this is what we're actually getting down to. So theme override, we'll call this, stop it. Stop moving around on me. UB theme. So you're going to just reference, so you reference theme, make this thing look the way I want. Oh, and this is in app. theme override. Builds, everyone's happy. Designer launches. Huh? What does the designer have? Middle one. Huh? Okay. Now I'm confused. So now I want to look at it. So come here, Snoop. I want to see what the heck you did. Yeah, you go to the side, you go to the side. You come over here, Control Shift, and I want to see your background. Interesting, so it didn't resolve. The resource theme brushes other could not be resolved, which is weird to me because theme brushes other, but other, did I typo something? It's weird that it's able to resolve two, which is dependent on it. If I invert the order, kind of expect that to not do it. Hey, Acid Rain, how you doing? Ah, interesting. Oh, oh, that's interesting. That is very interesting. I have a sinking suspicion. Oh, what's the back of my eyelids? I should probably be doing the same. I'm on 2 cans of Mountain, well, almost 2 cans of Mountain Dew and 6 hours of sleep. Eyelids sound like a great thing to watch. I am thinking that the issue is. Oh, yes. Oh, I should have grabbed it. I'll bring it next week. A buddy of mine got me the most awesome ball cap ever. And I am loving it. Okay, so let's go up here. Let's look at these app resources. So this guy here. So one, if people haven't seen this in Snoop, this is just pure absolute gold. So the inside, so from the root of Snoop, what is it? You can do underneath app, you can just expand out your resources and take a look at everything that's in the runtime dictionary. Time to go for here working, Illy. Darkom, have a good day at work. Good luck. Thanks for dropping by. I appreciate all the questions. But when you expand it out, you can actually start walking your resource dictionaries and take a look at them. So we can see here in the overrides one, I've got a single solid color brush that has the key of theme brushes primary. Not shocking. And then down here, I only end up with 2. And I'm pretty sure I know the reason. It's because the static resource. Yeah, you can't chain the aliases. I think they all have to reference the same primary. At least that's the working theory. No. That theory does not appear to hold. So what's going on? What's going on? So I have other 2. Okay, but not other. And if I invert them, I'm pretty sure I get the exact opposite. which I do, or at least the box is lighting up would appear to be so. Let's see. Interesting. Why is this static resource trick not behaving the way I expect? Rather than other two, let's name it foo. They are both self-closing. Why would one close that out? Let's make sure the override isn't affecting it. I don't think it should be. And then this becomes foo. Excellent. That's exactly what I expected to happen. Nothing works. Perfect. We're going to launch because I don't trust the designer. Did you upgrade Snoop to the new version 5.0? I did. Highly recommended. At least I'm pretty sure this is the new one. Where's my the light theme? I will say, as much as I like dark theme, I feel so this dark theme went almost a little too much like it looks like it's pure black and pure white, which is almost too much contrast. Whereas if you look over here, this isn't pure black. Like you can even see the difference between the Visual Studio dark theme and this, right? Is dark theme should be dark, but when you go pure black, it's almost grading the contrast ratio. It almost hurts more to look at it. I wonder. This might be why Ma Apps had a clever thing that they did at one point. Where is that? Where they rolled their own thingy-mabobber. Yeah, let's go look at what they did. Because Ma Apps had a... That's where I first saw this trick. Was theirs. Ma Apps. Go as a looking. They have... Let's see, it's in here. Where did they put it? Probably markup. Yeah, this guy. They did this. I'm curious. Curious why. Let's go here. We're gonna cheat and just drop this lovely little guy in. Thank you. Yeah, drop the namespace. We're gonna put up my namespace for the moment. I'm gonna try this. Snoop would use one great library. So the author of Snoop, Bastian Schmidt, I think I'm saying that correctly. He actually runs the let's see if we go controls EX. This guy. So you will note here this library, this lovely gentleman here. You'll note there's Snoop. So he'd be the one who runs Snoop. Also runs this library. This library is the backing library underneath Ma Apps, and it still kind of does, but not really as much anymore. It was the underlying library, and I think it shows, yeah, it was doing the underlying library from the material design library for a long time. The material design library didn't ever take a direct dependency on the NuGet package, but what it did instead is it was using a thing called packet rather than NuGet, because packet gives additional functionality in addition to NuGet packages. You can tell packet, hey, I have this file dependency, and it would go out to the Control-ZX library and download like the pop-up control and similar. Yeah, so there is there is all of this jazz. And you'll note this pack icon thing that looks remarkably similar to the one inside of the material design. This is how it started, was inside of here. Again, same for this type of thing as well. This is also the underlying thing inside of the Ma apps, the icon libraries from them as well. So it may be an interesting question. And see, I can contribute a couple things. Not a ton. And I've questioned whether there should be a dependency there or not. I go back and forth. Okay, I want to check this static extension. So I want to go here. So I want to use, let's see, XML and S. Let's do we'll just call it local CLR namespace. And then we will do template demo. What? Oh, I can't spell template demo. And then this becomes something more like local colon. Right? Static resource does not exist in template demo. Yes, it does. Move. There. That way I can see you. Compile. Let's see, what am I doing wrong? Static resource extension should be made optional. Extension's optional. Resource key. Oh, this is in the validation namespace. That's why it's not finding it. Try that again. There we go. Okay, so we do that. Ha. Interesting. Let me just launch to make sure that the interesting. That surprises me. That surprises me a little bit. Because so all we've done is make a derived class that calls into the base, and that works. Oh, I bet you it works because static and dynamic resources are special in WPF. Oh, I bet you that's why it works. I bet you that's why it works. Okay, so now that we're back to in functioning state, with these here, what happens if in my override I do something like this? Right? Oh, you have to include local in your namespaces. Come on, go find it. Come on. Hey, Copilot, do it for me. No? Okay. Let's see. Local get CLR namespace. Your autocomplete is killing me. Keep going to call it theme thing, and it's template demo. There. What happens if I do that? Does it still work? Yes. What happens if I override you to be red? Actually, I don't want that to be red. What I'd like to do is make a brush, give it the same key, put the key back in here real quick, and then now I expect the primary one to be red. Oh, interesting. So that changed primary and other. Interesting. So that changed primary and other. Hold on, let's reorder these a little bit. That opens up a different set of possibilities now. So my limited perspective is that the people who are going to want to do a lot of theming related changes, forcing them to put a namespace in front of static resource is not going to be too big of a lift. Because I suspect what they're going to be more interested in is gen me up the thing with all of the keys. So I'm anticipating generating an overrides file because I want it to be easy for somebody who wants to come in here and do it. I want to at least have documentation that says here's the override file you need to drop into your project. Maybe put that in the wiki. Maybe have the wiki auto generated from the pipeline. That's my thinking. Because we're already updating the wiki from the pipeline as it sits now, which is pretty slick. So when we set primary, oh, this one works because it's falling back to primary. Oh, hang on. That doesn't count. That doesn't count. So let's change this to foo. Okay, so that's the reason that one's working. It's because these are in the same resource dictionary. So now I expect only one red. Perfect. And if I do one here and I change it, and I change, for example, other to be blue, I get blue. I don't know why I keep stopping the app. The hot reload works really well for resource stuff. So it is still that same situation, is I'm going to need to generate up a bunch of these. Let's do a secondary theme color. So let's go with secondary and 00FF delete. Yeah, that'll work. And then this would end up being secondary. And this would end up being secondary. And then this would end up being, do a couple of these. Bar and Baz sound great. Bar. Baz. And this is secondary. Secondary. So those get structured like that. All right, we go here, we go here. We are quickly approaching grid territory. Grid, column definitions, column definition with auto. Two of those. I'm just gonna do stack panel in each. And then I'm just going to copy you, paste, and then I want you to be secondary bar Baz. And I get it, you're unhappy with me. Get it. I get it. You're unhappy. Oh, I did not put you in the second grid column. Grid column 1. And now we go, huh? Grid column. Restart that because that does not look correct to me. When I put two things in a grid. What? Oh. Because I didn't put the stack panels in the grid. You don't put them in the grid, it does not lay out properly. That's too deep. That looks better. There we go. Okay, so now we've got primary on the left, secondary on the right. And then in my override, if I wanted to change one of these, for example, I decide that I actually want the secondary brush to be, bring you down, brushes secondary as red. That changes that. Now, what's really disappointing is if I change the secondary brush in an override, it doesn't regen the other ones. Which doesn't shock me too much. I do wonder what happens. So let's just I'm curious if we can get away with this. I don't think it's going to work the way I want, but I want to try it. I haven't done enough playing with this stuff to know exactly how it's going to behave. So we're going to do this. Yeah, and I'm going to guess that you want a refresh. I get it. You're unhappy. So not surprising. Not overly surprising. Effectively the same behavior because the resolution of this dynamic resource is from this point, not from the other one. That is really disappointing because it means then that if I gen an override, somebody can't just override the secondary color. Because all of the theme ones downstream of it are going to have it. Ugh. I wonder, can I do... Hang on. We're going to try one more thing. I wonder, now that we've moved these, can I change the aliases in a different resource dictionary? Resource dictionary, how about theme aliases? Copy. Let you out. Paste. Nope. This line. You come back. And you like that. Now, if how would I expect to change this together? I expect this theme aliases. If I do this, one, does that still work? Ah-ha-ha! Now we have a way of injecting in the middle. And then if I wanted to do just a foo, so this shows overriding all the secondary colors using the base one. And if I did a solid color brush with a key of, let's do theme brushes other. Color green. That'll override just the one. And in the aliases, that's probably what we want. I don't think we want one alias referencing another. Though it could be nice. It could be nice. So hang on, let's try this. Let's have you go back to theme brushes other. The problem is the moment you have theme brushes chain, I think I'm gonna have to move them into I think I need a dictionary, a separate dictionary at each level of the chaining in order for this to work. So if I do that, what happens? Because I overrode other. Hold on, I overrode other. Foo depends on other, but foo is already resolved. Because I was kind of thinking it would be cool if I could override other and see it chain down. But the problem being is because these are in the same resource dictionary, and I think even if I make these, let me just check. I think even if I do these as static, it won't matter. But I think I would want all of the brush, yeah. So these resolve the same, whether they're static or dynamic. But I think that's a good question. I think I would want them dynamic. I think I would want them dynamic in most cases. Yeah, so basically everywhere where I want to be able to inject and have it propagate down through the resources, I have to separate it out into a separate resource dictionary. But if we do this where we have a base theme with theme colors and primary brushes, we then have a bunch of brush aliases. And this will just be a straight dictionary. I can just gen this once and be done, because this will be constant. And then the stuff that would need to be gen per color theme would be a combination of the base theme, because this will end up being like amber or red or what the various other material design base theme colors, coupled with the brush aliases. And then, yeah, so the overrides go here. Do I want the overrides here? Does that give people enough control? Because if I gen the overrides, right, so this works here inside the overrides dictionary. I don't think it works inside of here. Right? I don't think that is going to override anything. Oh, it does. It still works. Why does it work? Because these sit between the dynamic brush and there at runtime. Okay. I think that works. I almost want to do a test run with just a couple of these things to make sure. But I think this is fine then. So I gen these up. I'm almost wondering if I really need to gen these linky ones up. I've gotten it down to where it's really easy. Do I need these? I need a separation between each of these. Right? Because if I move these things up, right? If I move these things into the base, there's no opportunity to inject on the resolution because they just resolve to the ones in the same resource dictionary. But the moment they aren't in the same resource dictionary and it has to resolve them, it is then forced to go through my app.xaml or other resource dictionaries, which gives me an opportunity to get between where the brush is and where the color is defined. I think that works. I'm happy with it. I think the next step is then going to be implement it and test it. But I think I am happy with that. And then genning up that list, that might be the next step. Well, no. We'll do a small proof of concept in the material design app and do it. But I think I may end up calling it for the night as the lack of caffeine is getting to me. But as promised. Okay, I'm going to turn off the let's talk brain teaser. We can rename this brain teaser. Okay, so everybody's had plenty of time. Place your bets now on the values of A, B, and C. Okay, and let's launch and debug. We'll start with the answer and then work back to the why. Okay, so if we go locals, you will note the values of, and I'm going to just drag these over so they're nice and close to each other. A is year 001, B is 1970, and C is 001. Okay, so short version is B became the 1970 case, and A and C both got date time min value. So let's walk through what's going on here and see what's happening. And we're going to start with B since B is the unusual use case. So in this case, we're passing in a nullable double, and there is a concept here because nullable double int question mark is identical to nullable int. That's what the int question mark translates to. These are functionally the same. You'll note that Visual Studio is trying to say, hey, you don't need to do this. You can simplify the name back down, and they're the same. Great, I get it. When the thing with nullable int is you will note that this is a very simple struct. There's not a lot going on here. There's the common has value, get value or default, the toString thing that we abused last time, right? But there's not operators defined on this. So for example, less than is not defined. So the question comes, how is this actually being evaluated? The answer is what is called lifted operators in C#. So nullable of T is special. It gets special treatment. You can't match it. What ends up happening is when you do a comparison like this, nullable of T first checks for null. And if one side of this operand is null, it returns false. So just straight up, if null, doesn't matter what the value is on the other side, it's not greater than or equal to. Straight up false. Which means it can simultaneously be not greater than or equal to and not less than or equal to. Simultaneously. That's another fun one. Shoot, spoiling another brain teaser. Next time I'll show that. So the lifted operator for the ternary here is important to understand. So for the null case, it's going to not return true. It's going to always be false and fall into default. And then this guy here with -1 is also not greater than or equal to 0, so it falls into default. That makes sense. 0 is equal to 0, so we get 1970. Great. So the null case is the only weird one. Lifted operators, that's the magical answer. The other one that's worth noting is what this default is actually returning. So you'll note here that these are all declared as nullable date times, the question mark on here, and the function here is also a nullable date time. And I made this thing an expression bodied member, but we're gonna start breaking this apart a little to make it make a little more sense. And the important part to note is people often assume that these things here, let's see, with statements. So you'll note there's a subtle thing that has happened when I told it to break it apart from a ternary, is rather than just doing a return of default, it's doing a default of date time. And I do not love how it did that. That's clearer to me. Regardless, it's doing a default of date time, not nullable date time. Okay? And the default of date time is date time min, or min value. But the default of nullable date time is null. Two different things, because date time is also a struct. Right? We look at that. He is a struct, so a value type. But the important thing to note, so if we look at this, it becomes pretty obvious to understand why we didn't get a null back for either A or C. Right? Is because this default here is actually the default of a date time, not a date time nullable. Now, if we go all the way back into this vicinity, what gets confusing is when you have a ternary here, this default is effectively the same as if you put this inside of parens. So you first have to evaluate the ternary expression, and the compiler evaluates the ternary expression as both the true and the false case as returning a date time object, not a nullable date time object. This, to make the point even more clear, if you went date time question mark on this side, you've now changed the behavior. Because now the compiler looks at it and goes, I can now see that this side of the ternary is a nullable date time. Therefore, this thing also must be a nullable date time. So if we run this, you'll note I haven't touched the default side. I've only touched the true side. You'll note now, rather than getting date time min value when we hit the false case, we now get null. So the key thing to catch here, that I should say, that the interview answer for when somebody tries to trip you up with this in an interview, hopefully they don't ask questions like this in an interview. Brain teasers like this are not good interview questions. The key thing to point out here is that the default is part of the ternary, not part of the return. So despite how it may look, yeah, sorry, Justin Bieber, which this code, like in most cases, this code would look perfectly reasonable. And for a lot of code review, this would probably pass without people giving it a second thought. They just read through it and go, oh yeah, blah, 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 blah. But this is what actually came up in our code review, is there was a subtle difference where they were expecting a null and they weren't getting it. Again, also write unit tests. It saves you this pain and suffering. But making sure that it's clear that when you do a default without specifying the type, and I guess I'll point out here, if we specify the type for default, you'll note when I specify date time, default went, yeah, you don't need that. That's optional. When you specify it with the question mark, it goes, hang on. Now I need you to tell me the type because this is different than what I was going to do, right? When the compiler grays it out, that basically means the compiler going, yeah, I knew that. You didn't need to tell me. But when it's not grayed out, that's the compiler going, whoa, oh, you're doing something different. My bad. I got that one wrong. Because now it's changed the return type from the ternary expression, thus changing the return type of the method, or the return value to the method. So general guidance of what I would tell you here is if you use default without specifying the type, make sure the type is obvious. This is no different than like the guidance around using var. If you use var, the type should be obvious. If you use default without specifying a type, the type should be obvious. And you can also, hover just like var, you can hover your mouse on it and see what the compiler thinks the type is, right? The compiler is inferring date time, not nullable date time. Oops. So use the tools, be conscious of when things are different than what you expect the defaults to be. But there's the answer. So daytime min, 1970, or Unix epoch, if you want to get real fancy with it. But I think with that, I'm going to tell everyone thank you for coming and hanging out. I appreciate all of the old faces and new names of people dropping in with questions, comments. As always, I love questions. I have no problem getting side railed on answering questions or looking at things. Yeah, glad you enjoyed the brain teaser, Justin Bieber. Like I said, if anybody's interested, check out YouTube. I'm hoping to start putting together some short video content with these brain teasers in there. For those people who watch my stream regularly, spoiler, the first ones are probably going to be repeats. So don't worry, get to newer content. But I've got a whole slew of these kind of little things that I keep saving every time they come up. So I need to actually like put them into useful things rather than just slapping them in little unit tests here. So tell everyone good night, happy coding. See everyone next time.